What would you do if everything you relied on was sabotaged right when you needed it most? When Cassandra Blackwood lost her husband in a rock slide, she channeled her grief into becoming the most sought-after wilderness guide in the Copper Canyon territory. But when a notorious gang of outlaws destroys her equipment and leaves her stranded on the eve of her most important expedition, they have no idea they've challenged a woman who has memorized every cliff face, hidden spring, and treacherous passage in 500 miles of unforgiving terrain. This is the story of how one woman's extraordinary memory became her weapon against those who thought they could bury her along with her dreams. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the canyon walls as Cassandra Blackwood stood outside her outfitting station, watching the horizon for her clients who were now 3 hours late. Her weathered hands checked her equipment for the 4th time that day. Compasses calibrated, water purifiers tested, emergency beacons charged. Everything was ready for the expedition that would finally secure her outfitting business's future and honor the legacy her husband had left behind. At 42, Cassandra's face told the story of a life lived beneath harsh sun and whipping winds. The fine lines around her eyes had deepened in the 3 years since James's death, but they framed eyes that missed nothing, eyes that had mapped every inch of terrain they'd ever encountered. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, streaked with silver that had appeared in the months after the accident. She was lean and strong, built for endurance rather than speed, exactly what the unforgiving landscape of Copper Canyon demanded. The outfitting station itself was modest but meticulously organized. A main cabin with attached equipment shed nestled at the edge of Remington Pass, the gateway to the most spectacular and dangerous sections of the canyon. Maps lined the walls, each one annotated in Cassandra's precise handwriting, though she rarely needed to consult them. Every route, every elevation change, every seasonal water source was imprinted in her memory with photographic precision, a gift she'd had since childhood, but had honed to perfection during her 15 years guiding alongside James. Her satellite phone buzzed, pulling her attention from the horizon. "Blackwood Outfitters," she answered, voice clipped with the efficiency her clients had come to expect. "Mrs. Blackwood." The voice belonged to Harrison Wells, lead researcher for the geological survey team she was scheduled to guide. "There's been a complication. The university is reconsidering the expedition." Cassandra's grip tightened on the phone. "Reconsidering. We've been planning this for 8 months, Dr. Wells. Your team has exclusivity contracts with my outfit. The permits alone cost—" "I understand," he interrupted, his tone carefully neutral. "But we've received some concerning information about the viability of the route you've proposed." "What concerning information?" The question came out sharper than she intended. This expedition wasn't just another job. It was the financial lifeline her struggling business needed. After James died, half their regular clients had drifted to other outfitters, unconvinced a woman alone could safely guide them through terrain that claimed lives every year. A report indicating the northern passage you mapped might not exist, that continuing with your proposed route could endanger my research team. Ice formed in Cassandra's stomach. "That's impossible. I've traversed that passage myself 7 times, most recently last month during the pre-expedition scout. Nevertheless, the university board has concerns. I've been instructed to delay our departure while we reassess." "Who provided this report?" Cassandra demanded, already suspecting the answer. The hesitation on the line confirmed her fears before Wells even spoke. "Dominic Reeves submitted the safety assessment." Of course. Reeves' expedition company had been trying to absorb her small outfit for years, first with lowball buyout offers when James was alive, then with increasingly aggressive tactics after his death. Dominic Reeves had made no secret of wanting exclusive guiding rights to the entire Copper Canyon territory, especially now that the discovery of rare earth minerals was bringing research teams and mining interests to the region. Dr. Wells, I can send you my detailed survey notes from last month's scout. The Northern Passage not only exists, but it's the only viable approach to your research site that doesn't require specialized climbing equipment. I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Blackwood, but I'm afraid the board won't make a decision until next week at the earliest. I'm sorry. The call ended, leaving Cassandra staring at the equipment she'd spent weeks preparing, equipment that represented 3 months of advance payment she'd already spent on supplies, insurance, and hiring 2 assistant guides who were scheduled to arrive tomorrow. She placed the satellite phone carefully on the workbench, her mind already calculating the financial damage. Without the university expedition, she couldn't make the loan payment on the outfitting station. Without the station, she had no business. Without the business, she had nothing left of the life she and James had built together. A sound pulled her attention, the distant rumble of vehicles approaching from the canyon access road. Not her clients then, but someone. Cassandra stepped outside, shielding her eyes against the setting sun as 2 black SUVs appeared on the dusty road, trailing clouds of red earth behind them. The vehicles pulled up in front of the outfitting station, too new and too clean for the local ranchers or regular guides who occasionally stopped by. 4 men emerged from the first SUV, all wearing dark clothes despite the heat, all moving with the deliberate confidence of men used to intimidation. From the second vehicle stepped a figure Cassandra recognized instantly, his tailored desert wear and silver-streaked beard unmistakable even at a distance. Dominic, she acknowledged as he approached, not bothering to mask the ice in her voice. Quite a coincidence. You showing up right after your false report cost me my biggest contract of the season. Dominic Reeves smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. At 60, he'd built the largest outfitting company in 3 states through methods that bordered on predatory. No coincidence at all, Cassie. I wanted to see you in person when you realized it's time to be reasonable. Don't call me Cassie. The childhood nickname felt like an invasion coming from him. They'd grown up in the same small town on the canyon's edge, had even dated briefly in high school before his ambition and her independence pulled them in different directions. And there's nothing reasonable about corporate sabotage. Dominic sighed dramatically, glancing at the men who had positioned themselves around the property's perimeter. Always so melodramatic. I simply provided the university with my professional assessment of the risks. That North Passage of yours washed out in the flash flood last spring. Continuing to market it as a viable route is negligent at best, criminally reckless at worst. You're lying. Cassandra stepped closer, refusing to be intimidated on her own property. I walked that passage myself 4 weeks ago. The flood debris has been cleared since March. Your word against mine. He shrugged, examining the outfitting station with the calculating gaze of someone already measuring for renovations. And unfortunately for you, the university board includes 2 of my oldest clients. They trust my assessment. What do you want, Dominic? His smile widened. The same thing I've wanted for 3 years, to buy you out, only now I'm being exceptionally generous given your financial predicament. He pulled a folded document from his pocket. 40% of market value, which is 30%. More than this place will be worth after foreclosure. Cassandra didn't bother taking the paper. Not interested. You're facing bankruptcy, Cassie. Without the university contract, you can't make your loan payment at the end of the month. I've checked. The violation of her financial privacy didn't surprise her, but it stoked the anger simmering beneath her carefully controlled exterior. I'll find another client. In 2 weeks, with your reputation increasingly in question. Dominic gestured to one of his men, who began walking toward the equipment shed. Face reality. No one believes a widow with no formal training can safely guide expeditions through terrain that killed her more experienced husband. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The deliberate cruelty of the statement hit its mark, but Cassandra refused to give him the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Instead, she moved to block the man approaching her shed. "Your associate is trespassing." "Hector is simply assessing the equipment inventory for the sale," Dominic explained smoothly. "There is no sale. Get off my property." Dominic's expression hardened, the pretense of civility evaporating. "You have until tomorrow afternoon to accept my offer. After that, it gets withdrawn. I've already arranged to accommodate the university team once they terminate your contract officially. By this time next month, this outfitting station will be part of Reeves Expedition Company, whether you sell to me directly or I buy it for pennies at auction." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Cassie, I check your equipment carefully before your next outing. Terrible shame how safety gear can malfunction in these harsh conditions." The threat hung in the air as he returned to his vehicle. The man called Hector lingered by the equipment shed, meeting Cassandra's gaze with cold assessment before rejoining the others. The SUVs departed in a cloud of dust, leaving Cassandra alone with the sinking realization that Dominic wouldn't stop at sabotaging her client relationships. As darkness fell, she methodically inspected every piece of equipment in the shed, finding what she feared: ropes with nearly invisible cuts through the safety fibers, compromised water purifiers, tampered emergency beacons, and all 6 of her satellite GPS units completely destroyed, their internal components corroded from some liquid. Solution: the specialty equipment represented thousands of dollars she couldn't replace, not without the university contract. More devastating than the financial loss was the realization that Dominic knew exactly how to destroy her. Without this equipment, she couldn't safely guide any expedition, even if she found a last-minute client willing to hire her. The calculated malice of it, targeting the tools she relied on rather than confronting her directly, was pure Dominic. He'd always preferred to let circumstances break his opponents while keeping his own hands seemingly clean. Cassandra worked through the night, testing every piece of equipment, salvaging what she could, and making a precise inventory of the damage. By dawn, exhaustion had hardened into resolve. She would not let Dominic Reeves erase everything she and James had built. There had to be a way forward, some client who wouldn't be scared off by Dominic's influence. She was securing the damaged equipment when the sound of an approaching vehicle drew her outside once more. A battered Jeep pulled up, its aged frame covered in the red dust of the canyon roads. Relief washed through her as she recognized Eli Youngblood, the elderly Navajo guide who had taught both her and James the canyon passages decades ago. Though officially retired at 76, Eli remained the most knowledgeable person about the territory, and one of the few people Cassandra considered a true friend. "You look like hell," he observed by way of greeting, his weathered face creasing with concern as he took in her exhausted appearance. "Reeves paid me a visit yesterday." She led him inside, putting coffee on the small stove. Eli settled his lean frame into a chair, watching as she recounted the confrontation and the sabotaged equipment. When she finished, he nodded slowly, as if her news merely confirmed what he already suspected. "Dominic always wanted what he couldn't have," Eli remarked, accepting the steaming mug she offered. "Back when you chose James over him, I knew he'd never forgive either of you. Now that James is gone, he thinks you're vulnerable." "I am vulnerable," Cassandra admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "Without equipment, I can't guide. Without clients, I can't replace the equipment. He's backed me into a corner." Eli studied her over the rim of his mug. "Only if you play by his rules. What's the alternative? You know these canyons better than anyone alive. Better than me now. Better than Dominic and his GPS units." Your memory is what James used to call topographical eidetic. You see a place once, and it's mapped in your mind forever. Cassandra shook her head. Clients don't pay for memory. They want technology, safety equipment, modern conveniences. Most clients, yes. Eli set down his coffee and reached into his jacket, pulling out a folded letter. But I received this yesterday from an old acquaintance. Gabriel Sullivan is leading a private expedition to locate his grandfather's lost mining claim in the northern section of the canyon. He specifically requested a guide who knows the terrain intimately because the claim's location was deliberately obscured from official records. She accepted the letter, scanning its contents with growing interest. Sullivan was offering a substantial fee, enough to cover her loan payment and begin replacing the sabotaged equipment if she could successfully lead his team to the claim site. "Why come to you instead of Reeves?" she asked, suspicious of convenient timing. "Sullivan's grandfather and I served together in Korea, and he's had conflicts with Dominic in the past, mining rights disputes that got ugly." Eli leaned forward. "He's arriving tomorrow with a team of 4. Taking them to the claim site and back would be a 10-day expedition through exactly the territory you know best." "The Northern Passage," Cassandra murmured, possibilities suddenly opening before her. Without GPS or modern navigation, they would need a guide with perfect recall of the terrain. Eli's eyes sparkled with something like mischief. Someone who could find her way through the most treacherous sections of canyon country using nothing but memory and natural navigation markers. For the first time since Dominic's visit, Cassandra felt the weight on her shoulders lighten fractionally. It was risky. Guiding without her usual equipment, redundancies went against everything she and James had built their reputation on. But it might be her only chance to save what remained of their shared dream. "Does Sullivan understand the risks of going in with minimal technology?" she asked. "He's old school, prefers it actually. Doesn't trust GPS in canyon country anyway. Too many dead zones, too many signal bounces off the walls, giving false readings." Eli finished his coffee. "But it's your call, Cassandra. No one would blame you for walking away, starting fresh somewhere else." The thought had never occurred to her. This place, these canyons, were as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. The routes and passages lived in her mind with perfect clarity. The seasonal spring hidden behind the split rock at Whispering Canyon, the narrow ledge that provided the only safe crossing at Devil's Elbow during high runoff, the subtle changes in rock coloration that signaled dangerous instability along Widow's Ridge. She and James had mapped it all together, their shared passion becoming a language only they spoke fluently. Walking away would mean losing the last connection she had to him, to the life they'd built on their shared love of this harsh, beautiful wilderness. "I'll meet with Sullivan," she decided, already mentally cataloguing what minimal equipment she could cobble together by tomorrow. "If he understands what we're working with and still wants to proceed, I'll take the job." Eli nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I told him you'd say that, and I brought something you might need." He reached into his pack and withdrew, an old leather case which he placed on the table between them with reverence. Cassandra recognized it immediately, James's traditional navigation kit, the one he'd used before they'd gradually upgraded to modern equipment. Inside would be his lovingly maintained compass, sextant, paper maps, and the small notebook filled with his observations about seasonal changes to the canyon's features. "He'd want you to have these now," Eli said quietly. "And Cassandra? Dominic? Reeves may have technology and money and connections, but he's forgotten what it means to truly know the land. You haven't." As the morning sun broke fully over the canyon walls, illuminating the outfitting station in gold and crimson light, Cassandra ran her fingers over the worn leather of her husband's navigation case. Inside was everything she needed to guide Sullivan's expedition. That and the perfect map already etched in her memory, one that no sabotage could ever erase. What she didn't yet realize was that Sullivan's expedition would lead her not just to a lost mining claim, but into a decades-old conspiracy that would put her remarkable memory to the ultimate test and place her directly in the crosshairs of enemies far more dangerous than Dominic Reeves. Dawn had barely broken over the canyon rim when a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, announcing the arrival of Gabriel Sullivan and his expedition team. Cassandra had been awake for hours, assembling what functional equipment remained and studying James's old maps by lantern light. The paper was yellowed with age, the handwritten notes faded, but for her they served more as confirmation than guidance. The true map existed in her mind, unalterable and precise. She stepped onto the porch as the caravan of 3 vehicles pulled up, 2 rugged jeeps and a supply truck, all bearing the distinctive logo of Sullivan Mining Incorporated. The lead vehicle stopped, and a man in his late 50s emerged. Gabriel Sullivan had the weathered look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors, his silver hair cropped short, his movements efficient despite a noticeable limp. He approached. With hand extended, Mrs. Blackwood, Gabriel Sullivan, thank you for agreeing to guide us on such short notice. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct and assessing. Cassandra returned both. Mr. Sullivan, Eli speaks highly of you. Eli saved my grandfather's life in Korea. Our families have a bond. His eyes flickered to the outfitting station, taking in the modest setup. I understand you've had some equipment issues recently. That's one way of putting it. Cassandra didn't elaborate. If that's a concern, Reeves Expedition Company is 30 miles south. They have state-of-the-art everything. Sullivan's expression hardened. I wouldn't hire Dominic Reeves to guide me across a parking lot. Man's more interested in his profit margins than keeping his clients alive. He gestured to his team, who were unloading gear from the vehicles. We brought our own supplies and basic equipment. What we need is your knowledge. As if on cue, the team members gathered around. Sullivan made the introductions. Maya Vasquez, his geologist, Trevor and Noah Reed, brothers who specialized in mining engineering. And Iris Chen, his company's legal counsel, an unusual addition for a wilderness expedition, but Cassandra didn't comment. Mrs. Blackwood will be guiding us to my grandfather's claim site, Sullivan explained to his team. She knows routes through this canyon system that don't appear on any official maps. Maya, a compact woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes, stepped forward. Is it true what they say, that you can navigate the entire territory from memory? I don't make claims about my abilities, Cassandra replied, uncomfortable with the direct question. But I've been traversing these canyons for over 20 years. I know them intimately. Trevor Reed, the older of the 2 brothers, looked skeptical. With all due respect, ma'am, we're talking about over 500 square miles of some of the most confusing terrain in North America, ravines that all look identical, passages that change after every flash flood. That's exactly why we need... Sullivan interjected before Cassandra could respond. GPS is unreliable in the deep canyons, and my grandfather deliberately kept his claim location off official records. All we have are his journal notes, which reference landmarks rather than coordinates. Mrs. Blackwood, Iris Chen spoke up, her crisp business attire incongruous against the rugged landscape. Perhaps you could explain your navigation methodology to ease any concerns. Cassandra considered for a moment, then nodded toward the canyon that stretched before them, its layered walls glowing amber in the morning light. See that formation to the west? Most people would describe it as just another cliff face, but notice the diagonal striation patterns, the way the shadow creates a natural pointer at this time of day. That marks the entrance to Sidewinder Pass, which cuts 15 miles off the northern approach during dry seasons. She continued, pointing out barely perceptible features. a specific arrangement of boulders that indicated a seasonal water source, an unusual growth pattern in the vegetation that signaled stable ground beneath unstable appearances, a subtle, color variation in the rock face that marked one of the few safe ascent routes to the upper ridgeline. The team listened with increasing attention, even Trevor's skepticism fading as she demonstrated knowledge no GPS could provide. The living memory of a landscape that changed constantly, yet followed patterns that once learned could be read like a familiar book. "We'll leave in 1 hour," Sullivan decided, apparently satisfied. "According to my grandfather's journal, the journey to the claim site should take 5 days at a steady pace." 7, Cassandra corrected. The journal was written 50 years ago. 2 of the passages he likely used have collapsed since then. "We'll need to take the ascension route around Broken Tooth Ridge." Sullivan raised an eyebrow but didn't question her. 7 days it is. As the team dispersed to make final preparations, Cassandra noticed Iris lingering, studying her with barely concealed curiosity. "Something on your mind, Ms. Chen?" Cassandra asked, securing her pack. "I'm just intrigued by someone who chooses this life," Iris replied, gesturing to the isolation surrounding them. "Especially after—" She hesitated. "After my husband died," Cassandra finished for her. "I didn't choose this life after James was gone. I chose it long before I met him. The canyon was here first." Iris nodded, accepting the boundary Cassandra had drawn. "Mr. Sullivan has been searching for his grandfather's claim for over a decade. It's become something of an obsession. People get that way about the canyon," Cassandra said. "It pulls at something primal, the mystery, the challenge, but it doesn't forgive mistakes. Is that what happened to your husband?" The question came softly, but Cassandra felt its impact like a physical blow. "My husband's death wasn't a mistake. It was sabotage." The words emerged before she could reconsider, hanging in the air between them. She'd never stated it so boldly before, not even to Eli. Iris's eyes widened. "You believe someone deliberately caused the rock slide?" "I know they did. The primary anchor points had been tampered with." Cassandra turned away, unwilling to revisit that particular memory. "But the sheriff ruled it an accident. Natural rock slides happened frequently enough that one more didn't raise suspicions. Except with you, I saw the evidence before the secondary slide buried it." Cassandra shouldered her pack, ending the conversation. "We should join the others. Daylight's valuable in the canyon." The expedition moved out just as the sun cleared the eastern rim, casting long shadows across their path. Cassandra led them, along what appeared to be a game trail, but was actually an ancient route used by indigenous peoples for centuries before European settlers arrived. It wound through stands of juniper and pinyon pine before descending gradually toward the mouth of the main canyon system. Sullivan walked beside her for the first hour, consulting a worn leather journal that Cassandra assumed had belonged to his grandfather. The first landmark he mentions is something called Whispering Rock, a boulder formation where wind creates a sound like human voices. Cassandra nodded. "It's about 6 miles in at the junction of Phantom Creek and the main wash. We should reach it by midday. You know it." Sullivan seemed pleased, but not surprised. "Every major formation in this territory has a name and a story. Whispering Rock marks the traditional boundary between what used to be considered safe passage and what the old-timers called deserters' country. Terrain so confusing that outlaws would hide there, knowing even experienced trackers would get lost trying to find them." The morning progressed smoothly, the team maintaining a steady pace despite the increasing heat. Cassandra watched them with professional assessment. Maya moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to field work, conserving energy and staying alert to her surroundings. The Reed brothers worked in seamless tandem, supporting each other on tricky sections without needing verbal communication. Only Iris seemed out of place, though she tackled the difficult terrain with determination, if not grace. As predicted, they reached Whispering Rock by noon. The massive sandstone formation stood at the junction of two ancient watercourses. Its surface eroded into channels that caught the wind and transformed it into an eerie, almost human murmur. The team dropped their packs in the meager shade it provided, breaking for lunch and water. "It's exactly as my grandfather described it," Sullivan marveled, running his hand over the stone's weathered surface. "The gateway to the claim." "Gateway is a bit generous," Cassandra commented, scanning the harsh landscape that stretched before them. "From here, we're entering the most confusing section of the canyon system. Dozens of blind ravines, passages that circle back on themselves, terrain that can change completely after a single thunderstorm." Trevor exchanged a glance with his brother. "Sounds like a great place to hide something valuable, or hide from someone," Maya added, her gaze lingering on a set of recent boot prints that didn't belong to their party. "We're not the only ones. Out here," Cassandra had noticed the tracks an hour ago but hadn't commented. "Probably hunters. Game wardens occasionally patrol, though not often this deep." Sullivan studied the horizon, his expression unreadable. How well does Dominic Reeves know this section of the canyon? The question confirmed Cassandra's growing suspicion that there was history between the two men beyond what Eli had mentioned. Well enough to navigate the main passages with GPS assistance, not well enough to find his way if that technology failed. Good. Sullivan's tone held grim satisfaction. "Because after today, I'd prefer if our exact route wasn't easily traceable." "What? Aren't you telling me, Mr. Sullivan?" Cassandra kept her voice low, though the others were engaged in their own conversations. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document, which he handed to her wordlessly. It was a legal notice, a mineral rights claim filed by Reeves' Exploration subsidiary against the same general territory where Sullivan's grandfather had apparently staked his original claim. "Filed 2 days ago," Sullivan explained quietly. "Somehow, Dominic got wind of our expedition. He's trying to beat us to the punch." "This is about more than family history then," Sullivan's expression hardened. "My grandfather discovered something in these canyons that he believed was valuable enough to keep secret even from his own family. All he left were cryptic journal entries and a warning that men would kill for what lies beneath the Whispering Stone. I've spent a decade trying to piece together what he found, and now Dominic Reeves is racing you to it." Cassandra handed back the document. "Why bring a lawyer on an expedition like this?" "Because whatever we find, I need documented, legally witnessed, and secured immediately. Dominic has political connections I can't match. My only advantage is finding the claim first and establishing clear legal ownership." Before Cassandra could respond, Maya called out from several yards away, where she'd been examining the rock formation more closely. "Mr. Sullivan, I think you should see this." They joined her at a section of the rock face partially concealed by overgrown scrub. Maya had cleared away enough vegetation to reveal crude markings carved into the stone, a series of symbols that appeared deliberately arranged. "Are those Native American petroglyphs?" Noah asked, leaning closer. Cassandra shook her head. "No, this is newer, 50, maybe 60 years old, and these aren't indigenous symbols." She traced the markings with her finger. "These are old mining claim markers, but encoded." Sullivan consulted his grandfather's journal, excitement visible in his movements. "Yes, he mentions this exact spot, marked the stone with the navigator's cipher where only a patient man would look." He looked up at Cassandra. "Can you read it? It's a directional guide." She studied the markings, her mind automatically translating the crude symbols. "But it's deliberately misleading. See these arrows? They point west, but these counter markers indicate that's a false trail. The true direction is..." She followed the more subtle pattern, her finger tracing what most would miss. Northeast, following the shadow line of Split Mesa during the summer solstice. Trevor looked impressed, despite his earlier skepticism. How could you possibly know that? Because these are similar to markers James and I found throughout the canyon system. Old prospectors developed their own codes to misdirect competitors. Once you learn the basic principles, you can decipher most of them. Sullivan was already repacking his gear, energized by the discovery. Then we head northeast. How far to Split Mesa? 3 hours if we push the pace, Cassandra replied, already calculating their route through the increasingly dangerous terrain. But we should make camp before reaching it. The approach can be treacherous in fading light. The team moved out again, their earlier fatigue forgotten in the wake of this first concrete evidence supporting Sullivan's quest. As they navigated through narrowing passages, Cassandra maintained a mental inventory of every turn, every landmark, building the return route in her mind even as they ventured deeper into the canyon labyrinth. They made camp that evening in a protected alcove, the sheer walls providing natural shelter from the wind that had begun to pick up, carrying the distant scent of rain. Cassandra recognized the signs. A storm system was moving in from the west, still a day or two away, but worth monitoring. Flash floods were the canyon's deadliest hazard, turning dry ravines into raging torrents within minutes. After dinner, as the team gathered around the small fire, Sullivan opened his grandfather's journal and read aloud passages describing the discovery of his claim. The old man's words painted a vivid picture of the hardships he'd endured, the competitors he'd evaded, and his eventual discovery of something he called the Red Vein, a geological formation unlike anything he'd seen before. He never specified what mineral he found, Sullivan explained, closing the journal carefully. But he wrote that it was worth more than gold to those with vision. That was in 1962. He died before he could return and develop the claim properly. Why wait so long to search for it? Iris asked, asking the question Cassandra had been considering. The Far journal was lost for decades. My father had no interest in mining or his own father's desert obsessions, as he called them. It wasn't until after my father died that I found the journal in a box of old papers. Sullivan stared into the flames. By then, I recognized the significance of what my grandfather might have discovered. Which is, Trevor pressed. Sullivan exchanged glances with Maya before answering. Based on his descriptions and the geological surveys of this region, we believe he found a significant deposit of rare earth elements, specifically an unusual concentration of neodymium and dysprosium. Noah whistled softly. Critical components. For everything from wind turbines to military guidance systems. Exactly, elements that the United States currently imports almost entirely from China. Sullivan's voice took on an edge of urgency. If my grandfather's claim contains what we think it does, it could be strategically significant on a national level. The revelation cast their expedition in an entirely new light. This wasn't just about family legacy or even commercial mining rights. It was about resources that governments considered crucial to national security. No wonder Sullivan had been so careful. No wonder Dominic Reeves was suddenly so interested. As the others continued discussing the implications, Cassandra slipped away from the fire to check the perimeter of their camp. The wind had strengthened, carrying not just the promise of distant rain, but something else, the faint but unmistakable scent of cigarette smoke. Someone was nearby, watching. She moved silently along the edge of the firelight, her eyes adjusting to the darkness beyond. There, a brief flare of orange as someone took a drag, quickly extinguished but not before she marked the location. Approximately 200 yards west, positioned on a rise that would give clear sightlines to their camp. Cassandra returned to the fire, catching Sullivan's eye and gesturing subtly for him to join her away from the others. "We're being watched," she informed him quietly. "Single observer West Ridge, possibly a scout." Sullivan's hand moved instinctively to the sidearm he carried concealed beneath his jacket. "Reeves?" "Most likely. The question is whether they're just tracking us or planning something more direct." She glanced up at the darkening sky. "The storm system moving in might work to our advantage. Water will obscure tracks, and the canyon acoustics during rainfall make it nearly impossible to track by sound." "Can you lose them?" Sullivan asked, his voice tight with controlled tension. Cassandra nodded, already formulating the route adjustments. In her mind, "But it means taking paths no one else would attempt. Risky passages that won't appear on any map Reeves might have. Do it, whatever it takes." Sullivan's expression hardened with resolve. "Because if Dominic Reeves is willing to sabotage your equipment just to pressure you into selling your business, I don't want to find out what he'd do to claim a discovery worth millions." "Billions," Cassandra corrected softly. "If the deposit is as significant as you believe." In the flickering light of the campfire, shadows played across Sullivan's face, deepening the lines of determination or obsession that had driven him to search for his grandfather's legacy. "Then we need to reach it first, Mrs. Blackwood, before Reeves, before the storm, before whatever else this canyon decides to throw at us." What neither of them realized as they rejoined the group was that the observer on the ridge wasn't working for Dominic Reeves at all, but for someone with far more dangerous intentions for what lay hidden beneath Whispering Rock. Cassandra woke. Everyone before dawn, the eastern horizon barely tinged with grey. The air felt heavy with moisture, the storm drawing closer. Perfect for her purposes. "Change of plans," she announced as the team blearily packed their gear. "We're taking an alternate route to Split Mesa." Trevor frowned, checking his GPS unit. "The most direct course is still northeast." "Direct doesn't mean safest," Cassandra replied, deliberately not mentioning their observer from the previous night. "There's an unmapped passage through Phantom, gorge that will provide better shelter if the storm hits early." Sullivan backed her decision without question, his authority silencing any further debate. Within 20 minutes, they were moving in single file along a nearly invisible game trail that curved west before doubling back through a narrow crack in the canyon wall, a fissure so tight they had to remove their packs and push them ahead. To squeeze through, the passage opened into a sheltered ravine, untouched by direct sunlight, its walls covered in pale green lichen that gave the stone an otherworldly appearance. Water trickled down one wall, collecting in a shallow pool ringed with delicate ferns, an oasis hidden within the arid landscape. "This is incredible," Maya whispered, running her hand over moisture-slick stone. "How is this not on any geological survey?" "Because you can't see it from above, and the entrance is nearly impossible to spot unless you know exactly where to look," Cassandra explained, refilling her canteen from the spring. "James and I found it by accident during a flash flood 15 years ago. We were forced to take shelter in the fissure and discovered this place waiting on the other side." The ravine led deeper into the canyon system through increasingly narrow passages that twisted and turned like the chambers of a stone labyrinth. Cassandra navigated with absolute confidence, occasionally pausing to consult James's old compass, not because she needed directional guidance, but to confirm subtle magnetic variations he had documented years earlier. By midday, the storm clouds had swallowed the sky, turning the narrow strip visible above them into a rolling ceiling of charcoal. Grey. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a gusting wind carried the first spatters of rain into their faces. "We need to find higher ground before this hits fully," Noah said, eyeing the narrow canyon walls with concern. Even a moderate rainfall could turn their path into a deadly surge of water. Already heading there, Cassandra assured him, leading them up a steep, switchbacking trail that seemed to disappear into solid rock at several points, only to reveal hidden turns that continued. The ascent. The route was treacherous, requiring careful foot placement, and in 2 sections, improvised rope assistance to navigate particularly exposed segments. "You've got to be kidding me," Trevor muttered as they reached a spot where the path appeared, to end at a sheer wall. "Now what?" Cassandra didn't answer directly. Instead, she moved to a seemingly random spot, 10 feet to the left, and pushed aside a curtain of withered vines, revealing a dark opening barely wide enough for an adult to pass through. "Our shelter," she announced, ducking inside. The team followed, emerging into a cave that extended deep into the mesa's interior. Unlike the narrow ravine they had traversed earlier, this space bore unmistakable signs of human modification, crude stone steps leading to a leveled floor. Area, niches carved into the walls that once held tools or supplies, and most remarkably faded pictographs covering one entire wall. This was a mining camp, Sullivan realized, examining the space with newfound interest. Old, late 1800s, if I had to guess. 1873, Cassandra corrected. These caves were worked by a group of Confederate deserters who fled west after the Civil War. They were searching for silver but found only enough to sustain operations for about 5 years before abandoning the claim. Maya had moved to examine the pictographs, her flashlight illuminating images of stick figures, animals, celestial bodies, and geometric patterns, all executed in faded red ochre. These aren't from the miners. These are much older, indigenous artwork. Navajo, Cassandra confirmed. Eli showed these to me years ago. His grandfather helped hide the deserters here in exchange for medicine and tools. According to tribal oral history, this place was considered sacred long before the miners arrived, a place where the earth's blood rose close to the surface. Sullivan joined Maya at the wall, his expression intense as he studied the ancient images. Earth's blood, that could be a reference to mineral deposits. He ran his fingers over a particular section where concentric circles surrounded what appeared to be a lightning bolt striking the ground. This symbol, it appears in my grandfather's journal, copied exactly. Cassandra wasn't surprised. The miners didn't find much silver, but they did discover unusual red crystals embedded in the stone. They thought them worthless compared to precious metals, but your grandfather might have recognized their true value. The storm hit in full force as they settled into the cave, rain sheeting down outside the entrance and drumming on the stone. Overhead, where water found pathways through fissures in the mesa, they made camp in the cave's main chamber, the pictograph wall serving as backdrop to their fire. As the others prepared a simple meal, Sullivan approached Cassandra where she sat, mapping their day's journey in a small notebook, not for her own benefit, but to provide the team with a record of their route. "You deliberately led us here," he observed, his tone more curious than accusatory. "This wasn't just a convenient shelter." Cassandra nodded, completing the sketch before answering. "Your grandfather's journal mentioned the red vein. These caves have the same geological markers, though the deposit here was smaller. I thought seeing these might help confirm what we're looking for, and lose our shadow in the process." Sullivan glanced toward the cave entrance where rain continued to fall in wind-blown sheets. "No one could have followed us through those passages without being seen." That was the secondary benefit. Sullivan studied her with new appreciation. "You're more than just a guide with a good memory, Mrs. Blackwood. You think strategically. In canyon country, failing to think 3 steps ahead gets people killed." She closed her notebook. "But there's something you should know. This cave system connects to a broader network that runs throughout this section of the mesa. If you're Grandfather discovered a significant deposit of rare earth elements. It's likely part of a larger geological formation that includes these caverns, meaning we might be closer to the claim site than I thought. Possibly, but it also means we're not the first to make that connection. Cassandra stood, gesturing for Sullivan to follow her deeper into the cave, away from the others. Their flashlight beams illuminated a tunnel leading further into the mesa, its floor bearing the unmistakable marks of recent foot traffic. Someone's been exploring these caves, and recently. Sullivan crouched to examine the scuff marks and partial boot prints preserved in the mineral-crusted soil. Reeves. The timing fits, but these don't match standard hiking or exploration gear. Cassandra pointed to a distinctive tread pattern, military-style tactical boots, high-end, not typical equipment for casual explorers or even Reeves's guides. Before Sullivan could respond, Maya called from the main chamber, "You need to see this." There was an urgency in her voice that brought them hurrying back. She had been examining the cave floor more carefully and had discovered something beneath decades of dust. A metal box, approximately the size of a small suitcase, partially buried near the base of the pictograph wall. The team gathered around as Sullivan carefully excavated it, revealing a military ammunition case dating from the Korean War era. "This could be my grandfather's," Sullivan said, voice tight with anticipation. The case was locked, its surface corroded but largely intact. He was stationed in Korea in '52. Using tools from their packs, they managed to pry the rusted lock apart. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them remarkably well, were dozens of geological samples, each carefully labeled in faded handwriting. Beneath these lay a leather portfolio containing maps, letters, and most importantly, a detailed claim registration that had never been filed with any government office. "My God," Sullivan breathed, examining the documents with trembling hands. "This is it, the exact coordinates, the full mineral analysis." He looked up at his team, excitement breaking through his usual reserve. He found a primary deposit of rare earth elements more concentrated than anything documented in North America, and he kept it completely off the record. Iris moved to examine the claim document. "This is incredible but legally complex. An unfiled claim from the 1960s will need to work quickly to establish modern rights." "That's why you're here," Sullivan confirmed before turning to Maya. "What do you make of these samples?" The geologist had been examining the specimens with professional intensity. "If these labels are accurate, your grandfather found an unprecedented deposit. The neodymium concentrations alone would make this commercially significant, but the combination of elements here..." She looked up, her expression serious. "Mr. Sullivan, this isn't just valuable, it's strategically critical. Rare earth elements in these concentrations could make the country self-sufficient in technologies currently dependent on foreign sources." Noah whistled softly. "No wonder Dominic Reeves is rushing to file his own claim. If he got wind of this, he..." "Wouldn't," Sullivan interrupted sharply. "Only 5 people knew I was resuming my grandfather's search, and I trust all of them with my life." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Someone had leaked information. That much was clear from Reeves's sudden interest and the advance filing of his claim, the question of who hung unspoken in the air. "What matters now," Cassandra said pragmatically, "is reaching the primary deposit site and documenting your claim before anyone else can. According to these coordinates, how far are we from the main site?" Sullivan studied the map. "If this is accurate, less than 5 miles as the crow flies, but..." He traced the route marked on the yellowed paper. "The approach is complicated." He indicates a series of caverns that connect under the mesa, emerging near what he calls Sentinel Spire. Cassandra knew the formation immediately. That's at the far end of Spectre Canyon. From here, it would be at least 2 days overland, longer if the storm washes out any routes through the lower passes. And through these caves? Trevor asked, eyeing the dark tunnel they had investigated. Earlier, unknown, Cassandra admitted. James and I explored some of the connecting passages, but never mapped the full system. It could be more direct, but cave navigation brings its own risks. Dead ends, unstable chambers, underwater sections. Sullivan carefully rewrapped the documents and selected samples, placing them in his own pack. We continue underground. If these passages connect to the deposit site, as my grandfather indicated, it's our best chance to move undetected. The decision made, they spent the remainder of the day preparing for cave exploration. Cassandra inventoried their limited equipment, determining what could be repurposed for the underground journey. With their headlamps, spare batteries and ropes, they could manage basic caving, though not with the safety margin she would normally insist upon. As the others rested before their underground venture, Cassandra returned to the pictograph wall, studying the ancient images with renewed interest. Among the abstract symbols and representational figures, one particular sequence caught her attention, a series of connected spirals leading to a central sun-like image. The pattern was strikingly similar to the tunnel system they had begun to explore, suggesting the indigenous people had mapped the underground passages in their sacred artwork. "It's a navigation guide," Cassandra murmured, tracing the pattern with her fingertip. The realization sent a shiver of excitement through her. If she could interpret these symbols correctly, they might have a map more reliable than modern instruments. For the labyrinth ahead, she was so absorbed in the discovery that she barely registered the subtle shift in air pressure that preceded a sound no caver ever wants to hear. The distant rumble of rock collapsing somewhere in the tunnel system. The ground beneath her feet trembled slightly, and dust sifted down from crevices in the ceiling. The others jolted awake at the noise, alarm evident on their faces. "What was that?" Iris asked, her voice tight with fear. "Cave in," Trevor answered, grimly, already reaching for his headlamp. "Somewhere in the system." They gathered at the entrance to the main tunnel, Cassandra and Sullivan taking the lead as they cautiously advanced into the darkness. The air grew noticeably dustier as they progressed, forcing them to cover their mouths and noses with bandanas. After approximately 200 yards, they discovered the source of the disturbance. A section of ceiling had collapsed, completely blocking the passage ahead. "Natural?" Noah asked, examining the debris with his headlamp. Cassandra inspected the edges of the collapse carefully, noting several critical details: the clean cuts on some of the rock faces, the remnants of boreholes visible in the larger fragments. No. This was deliberately triggered. Someone used explosives to seal this tunnel. The implications hung heavy in the air. Someone had been here very recently and had taken drastic measures to block their path or trap them inside. "There must be another way through," Sullivan insisted, his determination unwavering despite this setback. Cassandra thought of the pictograph map she'd been studying. "I think there is. The wall paintings suggest multiple connecting passages." They returned to the main chamber, where Cassandra carefully photographed the pictographs using her aging digital camera, one piece of technology that had survived Reeves's sabotage. She then sketched the key patterns in her notebook, creating a working translation of what she believed was a map of the cave system. "If I'm interpreting this correctly," she explained to the group, pointing to her sketch, "there are 3 main tunnel networks. The one that just collapsed was the most direct route, but there's another passage that branches from what they depicted as the sleeping snake's tail, which I think refers to this curved formation at the back of the main chamber." Sure enough, behind a cluster of fallen rocks that they had assumed marked the chamber's boundary, they discovered a narrow opening leading into another tunnel system. This passage was tighter than the first, requiring them to proceed single file. and occasionally crawl through constricted sections. The going was slow and psychologically taxing. The beam of their headlamps cut through absolute darkness, revealing glimpses of a world few humans had ever seen. Delicate crystal formations growing from walls slick with mineral-rich moisture. Strange, pale insects scuttling away from the light. Ancient fossils embedded in stone laid down millions of years before the first human walked the earth. After what felt like hours but was probably less than 90 minutes, the passage widened into a significant chamber where multiple tunnels converged like spokes on a wheel. Here, they paused to rest and reorient. According to the pictograph map, we want the third opening from the left, Cassandra indicated. That should lead toward Sentinel Spire. Should? Trevor questioned, his earlier skepticism returning. We're betting our lives on your interpretation of prehistoric cave paintings. You're welcome to use your GPS, Cassandra replied evenly. But the signal won't penetrate this much rock, and the magnetic properties of these formations make compasses unreliable. Sullivan had been examining the chamber with particular interest, his headlamp lingering on a section of wall where the stone had a distinctly reddish cast. He moved closer, then called Maya over with growing excitement. "Look at this matrix. It's exactly what my grandfather described." The geologist inspected the rock face, then carefully chipped off a small sample. It's similar to the specimens in the case, but with even higher concentrations, if I'm judging correctly. We must be getting close to the primary deposit. Their path chosen both by ancient guidance and geological confirmation, they pressed on. Through the third tunnel, the passage began to slope noticeably upward, the floor transitioning from smooth, worn stone to increasingly jagged terrain that required careful navigation. Water had begun to seep through fissures in the ceiling, likely from the continuing storm above, creating slick patches that threatened treacherous falls. They had been underground for nearly 4 hours when Cassandra, still in the lead, felt a change in the air, a subtle freshening that suggested proximity to the surface. The tunnel curved sharply upward, culminating in a tight chimney that required technical climbing to ascend. "I'll go first," she decided, securing one of their precious ropes to provide assistance for the others. The climb was challenging, but manageable, the rock offering sufficient handholds for someone with experience. At the top of the chimney, the passage narrowed to a crevice barely wider than her shoulders. She squeezed through, emerging into a space where ambient light penetrated from somewhere above. Cassandra climbed toward the light source, eventually reaching a small opening partially concealed by fallen debris and overgrown vegetation. Pushing aside the natural camouflage, she peered out into rain-washed daylight. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by running water and mist that clung to the canyon walls like ghostly veils. And there, rising majestically against the clearing sky directly ahead, stood Sentinel Spire, a needle-like formation of red sandstone that marked the entrance to Spectre Canyon. They had navigated successfully through the underground labyrinth, emerging precisely where Sullivan's grandfather had indicated the primary deposit would be found. As she helped the others emerge from the cave system, Cassandra felt a growing sense of unease. Their underground journey had been successful. Too successful, perhaps. The collapsed tunnel suggested someone was actively working to prevent their progress. Yet they had reached their destination with relative ease through the secondary route. It was almost as if they had been herded here, guided along a predetermined path to this specific location. The question was, who was waiting for them to emerge? And what would happen when they finally reached the legendary red vein that had remained? Hidden for over half a century, the land surrounding Sentinel Spire existed in permanent twilight, its narrow confines rarely touched by direct sunlight. Sheer walls rose on 3 sides, creating a natural amphitheater where sound behaved strangely, sometimes amplifying to thunderous proportions, other times swallowing noise completely. Water from the recent storm cascaded down the cliff faces in silver ribbons, collecting in pools that reflected the crimson-streaked stone above. "It's exactly as he described it," Sullivan breathed, comparing the scene before them to a hand-drawn sketch from his grandfather's journal, the cathedral where Earth offers its rarest treasures. Cassandra surveyed their surroundings with professional caution. They had emerged onto a narrow ledge approximately 20 feet above the canyon, floor partially concealed by an overhang. From this vantage point, she could see the entire basin that formed the approach to Spectre Canyon. Most importantly, she could confirm they were alone, at least for the moment. "We should move quickly," she advised, helping Iris navigate the slippery descent to the ground below. "This place will be dangerous if another storm cell moves through. The entire basin can flood within minutes." Maya had already shifted into research mode, examining exposed rock strata along the canyon walls with growing excitement. "The geological markers are textbook perfect. Look at these intrusion patterns, classic signs of rare earth mineralization. Sullivan, your grandfather was a genius to recognize this formation at a time when these elements weren't even commercially significant." Sullivan nodded absently, his attention fixed on a dark opening at the base of Sentinel Spire. "That's it. The entrance to the main deposit, it has to be." The opening was unremarkable at first glance, just another shadow among many where erosion had carved recesses into the canyon wall. But as they approached, distinctive features emerged, tool marks around the edges where the natural opening had been carefully expanded, weathered timber reinforcing the entrance, and most tellingly, a crude symbol carved into the stone above, matching one from the indigenous pictographs they had studied earlier. "The Earth's blood," Trevor murmured, recognizing the symbol. His earlier skepticism had given way to professional curiosity. They paused at the entrance, Sullivan checking the stability of the aged support timbers while Maya assessed potential geological hazards. The entrance appeared stable despite its age, suggesting the original mining work had been expertly done. "Standard mining protocols," Sullivan directed, switching on his headlamp. "No one enters or leaves alone. We maintain voice contact at all times. Any sign of instability, we retreat immediately." With Sullivan and Maya taking the lead, they entered the ancient mine. Unlike the natural cave system they had navigated earlier, this tunnel showed clear signs of human engineering. A relatively level floor, consistent width, and ceiling height that accommodated comfortable passage. Wooden support structures appeared at regular intervals, remarkably preserved in the dry desert air. "Korean War-era construction techniques," Sullivan noted, examining the support bracing. "My grandfather would have learned these during his military service. These are holding up better than modern hydraulic supports in some cases." The tunnel extended approximately 50 yards into the base of the spire before opening into a larger chamber. As their headlamps swept the space, Maya gasped audibly. The walls glittered with embedded crystals that caught and reflected their light in flashes of deep crimson. "It's magnificent," she whispered, approaching one wall with reverent caution. "I've never seen such concentration. These aren't just rare earth elements. This is a geological anomaly that shouldn't exist." While Maya and the Reed brothers conducted preliminary examinations, Sullivan retrieved the claim documents from his pack, comparing the hand-drawn maps to their current location. "This is definitely the primary chamber his notes describe, but he indicates additional workings deeper in the formation." Cassandra had been studying the chamber with a guide's practiced eye, noting details others might miss. Air circulation patterns, subtle changes in temperature, the way sound carried. Something didn't match her expectations. "This mine is still active," she stated with quiet certainty. The team turned to her in surprise. "That's impossible," Trevor objected. "The entrance was practically invisible. The supports are decades old." No one's touched this place since Sullivan's grandfather. Cassandra moved to a seemingly solid section of wall and ran her hand along its surface, finding what she was looking for, a nearly invisible seam where natural stone met carefully disguised modern materials. This is a false wall, constructed recently. There's active mining happening beyond this point. Sullivan joined her, examining the disguised barrier. She's right. This is advanced camouflage material, the kind used in military applications. He pressed his ear against the surface, and there's mechanical noise on the other side, faint but regular. Who would be mining here secretly? Iris asked, legal implications already forming in her mind. This claim wasn't registered with any government agency. Someone who doesn't want federal oversight, Noah suggested, or someone who discovered the deposit independently and wants to keep it off international markets. Sullivan's expression had darkened. Or someone my grandfather trusted with the location who decided the deposit was too valuable to share. He turned to Cassandra. Is there a way past this barrier? She examined the disguised door carefully. It's designed to blend perfectly with the surrounding rock, but it has to open somehow. There would be a mechanism. Her fingers probed the edge of the structure, feeling for irregularities. Finally, she found a slight depression that yielded to pressure. With a pneumatic hiss, the false wall slid sideways, revealing a modernized tunnel beyond. The contrast was stark, from 19th century mining techniques to 21st century technology in a single step. LED strip lighting illuminated a smoothly bored tunnel with metal support structures and ventilation systems. The distant hum of machinery confirmed Cassandra's assessment. Someone was actively working the deposit. This is a multi-million-dollar operation, Trevor whispered, professional assessment overriding his shock. State-of-the-art equipment, sophisticated engineering. Whoever built this has serious resources. Sullivan's face had settled into grim determination. We need to document everything before whoever's running this operation discovers we're here. Maya, collect samples from both the original chamber and this new section. Iris, start the legal documentation process. Trevor, Noah, assess the scale of these operations. And you, Cassandra asked, noting the hardened resolve in his expression, I'm going to find out who stole my grandfather's discovery. He checked his sidearm. And I suspect we'll have answers very soon. An operation this sophisticated will have security systems. As if confirming his words, a subtle change occurred in the tunnel's ambient noise. The mechanical hum altered its pitch slightly, and a nearly imperceptible vibration ran through the floor beneath their feet. We've triggered something, Cassandra warned. An alarm or proximity sensor. Sullivan nodded. Work quickly. We may not have much time. The team dispersed to their assigned tasks, moving with the urgency of people who knew their discovery was temporary. Cassandra stayed near the entrance to the modernized section, her attention divided between watching for approaching danger and studying the sophisticated operation before them. The new mining tunnel extended deeper into the formation, its lighting growing brighter as it progressed. Approximately 50 yards in, it opened into a massive excavation chamber where automated equipment extracted and processed material from a vein of crystal-rich rock that pulsed with deep red luminescence under the work lights. Trevor returned. From his initial assessment, excitement and concern battling in his expression. This is unbelievable. They're using prototype extraction technology that shouldn't even exist outside of theoretical research. The efficiency is off the charts. They're processing material at 10 times the rate of conventional mining. Maya rejoined them, carefully labeled sample containers filling her pack. The mineral composition is extraordinary. Not just rare earth elements, but specific isotopes that are particularly valuable for quantum computing and advanced weapons systems. Whoever is running this operation knows exactly what they're extracting and why it's valuable. Sullivan had been examining operational logs displayed on a monitoring station near the main excavation equipment. According to these records, they've been active for approximately 3 years, but with dramatically increased production in the last 6 months. He looked up, connecting pieces of a puzzle that had eluded him for years. That coincides with the international rare earth element embargo that's been driving prices to record levels. A voice spoke from behind them, startling the entire group. Very observant, Mr. Sullivan. Your grandfather would be proud of your deductive reasoning. They spun to find the entrance blocked by 4 armed men in tactical gear, led by a figure Cassandra recognized instantly, despite never having met him in person. Victor Axiom, Dominic Reeves's silent partner and the true power behind Reeves Expedition Company. Tall and imposing even in his 60s, Axiom projected the confident authority of someone accustomed to complete control. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his desert attire custom-tailored, and the sidearm holstered at his hip was clearly for more than show. Mr. Axiom, Sullivan acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral despite the sudden tension that had electrified the space. I didn't realize you had an interest in mining operations. Axiom smiled thinly. I have interests in many ventures, Gabriel. Resource acquisition has always been a particular specialty. He surveyed the group with calculating assessment. Though, I must say, your choice of guide exceeds even my expectations. Mrs. Blackwood's reputation for knowing these canyons is well-deserved. You've been monitoring our progress, Cassandra stated rather than asked, pieces falling into place in her mind. The observer at our camp wasn't working for Dominic Reeves. He was reporting to you. Dominic works for me, Mrs. Blackwood, as do many others whose names might surprise you. Axiom gestured to his armed men. Please surrender any weapons and communication devices. While I'd prefer this encounter remain civil, my security team is authorized to ensure cooperation by whatever means necessary. Sullivan's hand had drifted toward his concealed sidearm, but with 4 automatic weapons trained on the group, he reconsidered. Slowly, he removed his gun and placed it on the ground. A wise decision, Axiom commented. Now, perhaps we should discuss the situation like the business people we are. There's nothing to discuss, Sullivan responded, barely controlled anger evident in his tone. You're illegally mining a deposit discovered by my grandfather, a deposit I have legal claim to through inheritance and documented proof. Axiom seemed amused rather than concerned. Ah, yes. The mysterious claim that was never registered with any government agency. Difficult to enforce legal ownership of something that officially doesn't exist. He studied Sullivan with something like genuine curiosity. Tell me, did you never wonder why your grandfather kept this discovery secret? Why a man who spent his life searching for valuable minerals would find the most significant deposit of his career and tell no one? The question seemed to catch Sullivan off guard. He was protecting it, waiting for the right time to develop it properly. He was hiding it, Axiom corrected, because he understood what had been discovered was too valuable for any private citizen to control. Your grandfather wasn't just a prospector, Gabriel. He was an intelligence operative, a resource scout, for classified government programs during the Cold War. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Sullivan's expression reflected shock, then dawning comprehension as pieces of his family history suddenly aligned in new patterns. That's why he never spoke about his time in Korea, he murmured almost to himself. The geological surveys he conducted weren't just for mining companies. They were for identifying strategic resource deposits that could give the United States advantages in an increasingly technological conflict, Axiom confirmed. Your grandfather discovered this formation in 1962 at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He recognized its strategic value immediately and reported it through classified channels. If that's true, Iris interjected, her legal mind already analyzing implications, then this would be a government-controlled resource. You have no more right to it than Sullivan does. Axiom's smile remained, but his eyes hardened. The program your grandfather worked for was discontinued in 1978. All records were sealed, all claims reverted to inactive status. When certain interested parties learned of the deposit's existence in 2019, its legal status was ambiguous at best. So you simply seized it, Cassandra concluded, pieces connecting in her mind. And when Sullivan began actively searching for his grandfather's claim, you needed to find it first. Which is why you pressured me to sell my outfitting station, she continued, anger building as the full picture emerged. You needed control of all access routes to this canyon system to protect your illegal operation. When I refused to sell, you sabotaged my equipment and tried to destroy my reputation. Business decisions, Mrs. Blackwood, nothing personal. Axiom's casual dismissal of his actions only intensified the cold fury building within her. Was it also a business decision to cause the rock slide that killed my husband 3 years ago? The question emerged before she could reconsider. The accusation she had carried silently for years finally given voice. A flicker of surprise crossed Axiom's face, quickly masked but unmistakable. An unfortunate accident. Rock slides are common in these canyons. James and I documented unusual drilling patterns on the ridge above Serpent Pass 2 days before the slide. We planned to report it to the Bureau of Land Management, suspecting illegal exploration. Cassandra's voice remained steady, despite the emotion churning beneath her words. The next day, the primary anchors on that ridge were sabotaged. The investigation was buried along with my husband. Sullivan turned to her, shock evident in his expression. You never said there was no proof, only my word against a powerful man with connections throughout the county. Cassandra held Axiom's gaze, refusing to back down. But you miscalculated. You thought eliminating James would end our documentation of unusual activities in the canyon system. Instead, I continued mapping every square inch of this territory, memorizing what couldn't be recorded where others might find it. Axiom studied her with newfound respect, or perhaps caution. Impressive dedication, Mrs. Blackwood, though ultimately futile. This operation is too valuable to too many powerful interests to be exposed by a wilderness guide with a good memory. Who are you working for? Sullivan demanded. This isn't just a private mining operation, not with this level of technology and security. Perceptive, as I would expect from William Sullivan's grandson. Axiom appeared to make a decision. Very well, since you've come this far, you deserve some truth. This operation is a joint venture between private investors and certain government elements who prefer to access strategic resources without the complications of public oversight or international scrutiny. A black project, Noah whispered, understanding dawning. Off the books. Precisely. The rare earth elements being extracted here are supplied directly to advanced weapons programs and quantum computing initiatives that officially don't exist. Axiom's expression grew serious. Which is why no one can know this facility exists, and why your unfortunate spelunking accident will be such a tragedy for the canyon guiding community. The threat hung in the air, unambiguous in its implication. Maya instinctively stepped back, while the Reed brothers moved protectively closer to her. Sullivan remained focused on Axiom, clearly calculating options that dwindled with each passing second. Cassandra, however, felt a strange calm settling over her. This confrontation had been building for 3 years, ever since she had stood alone at James's funeral, watching Victor Axiom offer hollow condolences while Dominic Reeves surveyed her property with calculating eyes. In that moment, she had known something was wrong, but had lacked the proof or power to act on her suspicions. Now, standing in the heart of the operation that had cost her husband his life, the playing field had finally leveled. Axiom had firepower and connections, but she had something he didn't: intimate knowledge of the environment surrounding them. "You've overlooked something critical, Mr. Axiom," she said, her tone conversational despite the tension crackling through. "The chamber." "And what might that be, Mrs. Blackwood?" Cassandra glanced meaningfully upward. "The storm cycle in these canyons. The first cell passed through, but the secondary bands are typically more severe. Judging by the barometric pressure drop I've been monitoring, the next wave is approximately 20 minutes from breaking directly over Sentinel Spire." Axiom frowned, obviously wondering if this was a desperate bluff. "Our facility is fully secured. Against flooding, perhaps, but the approach routes won't be. Flash flooding will make extraction impossible for at least 24 hours, which means if you intend to eliminate us and remove our bodies, you need to act immediately." She held his gaze steadily. "Or you could negotiate." It was a calculated risk, appealing to the businessman rather than the criminal. Axiom prided himself on rational decision-making, on weighing options for maximum benefit with minimum exposure. The strategy appeared to work. After a moment's consideration, he nodded to his security team, who lowered their weapons slightly, still ready, but no longer in immediate firing position. "What do you propose, Mrs. Blackwood?" Sullivan documents his legal claim to his grandfathers. "Discovery. You've been operating illegally, but that can be rectified through proper channels. A partnership arrangement can be structured that maintains operational security while providing appropriate compensation for the rightful owner of the mineral rights." "And what do you want from this arrangement?" Axiom asked, studying her with renewed interest. "Justice for James." Her voice remained level, but her eyes conveyed the non-negotiable nature of her demand. "A full acknowledgement of responsibility for the sabotage that caused his death, with appropriate compensation to fund a canyon safety initiative in his name." Axiom considered the proposal, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. After what seemed an eternity, he spoke. "Sullivan gets 30% ownership of the existing operation, structured through appropriate security clearances. The Canyon Safety Initiative receives $5 million in funding, but without any admission of responsibility for your husband's unfortunate accident." 50% ownership, Sullivan countered immediately, "and full acknowledgement of James Blackwood's death as a direct result of sabotage, with no criminal charges pursued in exchange for the financial settlement." The negotiation had shifted power in the room, transforming a potential massacre into a business discussion, exactly as Cassandra had intended. While Sullivan and Axiom haggled over percentages and terms, she maintained her awareness of their surroundings, tracking subtle changes in air pressure that confirmed her weather prediction was accurate. The next storm cell was indeed approaching, though perhaps not as imminently as she had implied. What neither Axiom nor Sullivan had noticed was Maya's position near a control panel that regulated the mine's ventilation systems. Following Cassandra's lead, the geologist had quietly adjusted several settings, creating a gradual but accelerating buildup of pressure in the auxiliary air handling systems. If necessary, she could trigger an emergency shutdown that would force evacuation of the entire facility, a last resort option that would buy them crucial time. Iris had positioned herself to document the conversation on her phone's recording app, while the Reed brothers had subtly gathered potential improvised weapons from nearby equipment. The team had transformed from vulnerable captives to active participants in their own survival, all following Cassandra's example of calm, strategic thinking. 40% ownership, full acknowledgement of wrongdoing in the Blackwood case, with financial settlement determined by independent arbitration, Axiom finally offered. "That's my final position." Sullivan glanced at Cassandra, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Acceptable in principle," he agreed. subject to proper documentation drafted by Ms. Chen and reviewed by my legal team. Naturally, Axiom gestured to one of his men, who lowered his weapon completely and moved to retrieve a satellite phone. I'll have our attorneys begin drafting terms immediately. The immediate threat had diminished, but Cassandra knew better than to relax. Victor Axiom hadn't built his empire by honoring agreements made under duress. The negotiation had bought them time, not security. As if confirming her concerns, a distant rumble echoed through the cavern, not the mechanical sounds of mining equipment, but the unmistakable voice of water moving at high velocity through narrow stone passages. "The storm has arrived early," Cassandra announced, meeting Axiom's suddenly alarmed gaze with calm certainty. "And unless I'm mistaken, your facility's outer floodgates have failed to deploy." The security team's leader whispered something urgent to Axiom, who barked immediate orders into a communication device. Alarms began to sound throughout the facility, and the previously steady lighting flickered ominously. "Full evacuation," Axiom commanded, his businesslike demeanor giving way to urgent action. "Secondary exit route, now!" In the controlled chaos that followed, Cassandra gathered her team with silent signals, guiding them toward the original entrance, rather than following Axiom's group toward what was presumably a more modern escape. Route. Sullivan hesitated briefly, clearly torn between pursuing Axiom and ensuring his team's safety. Cassandra's steady gaze made the decision clear: survival first, justice later. As they retraced their steps through the original mining tunnel, the sound of rushing water grew louder. The storm had indeed arrived with unprecedented force, transforming the canyon's delicate ecology into a raging torrent that threatened both Axiom's secret operation and their own escape. What Axiom didn't know, what only Cassandra's perfect recall of the canyon's hydrology could predict, was exactly how the floodwaters would flow, which passages would remain navigable, and most importantly, which route offered their only chance of survival as the canyon's ancient voice awakened in full fury around them. Water thundered through the canyon system, its roar amplified by the stone corridors into a deafening cacophony. Cassandra led her group through the original mine tunnel, moving with the confident precision of someone navigating familiar territory, despite the crisis unfolding around them. "The main basin will be completely flooded within minutes," she shouted over the noise as they reached the mine entrance. "We can't go back the way we came." The scene outside confirmed her assessment. What had been a series of tranquil pools at the base of Sentinel Spire was now a churning maelstrom. Muddy water poured from a dozen channels carved into the canyon, walls converging in the basin with increasing violence. The storm above had intensified beyond even Cassandra's expectations, black clouds boiling across the sky and releasing sheets of rain that reduced visibility to mere yards. "Where's Axiom?" Sullivan demanded, scanning the chaos for signs of the man who had threatened them moments ago. "Secondary exit on the northwest face." Cassandra pointed toward a barely visible ledge halfway up the canyon wall, where figures were emerging from a concealed entrance. "But we can't follow. That route will be cut off by the secondary flow within minutes." "Then we're trapped." Iris's professional composure finally cracked, fear evident in her voice. "No." Cassandra surveyed the rapidly transforming landscape, her mind overlaying the current catastrophe with the canyon's permanent features stored in her memory. "There's a high route through Dragon's Backbone that stays above the floodline. It connects to Whispering Rock, where we can wait out the worst of the deluge." The route she indicated looked impossibly treacherous, a near-vertical climb up fractured stone, followed by a precarious traverse along a knife-edge ridge. Under normal circumstances, only experienced climbers with proper equipment would attempt such a path. In the midst of a flash flood and torrential rain, it appeared suicidal. "You can't be serious," Trevor objected, eyeing the proposed escape route with naked disbelief. "We'll never make that climb in these conditions." "We don't have a choice." Sullivan supported Cassandra's decision immediately. "The water's rising too fast. Mrs. Blackwood, lead the way." They began the ascent with desperate urgency, the floodwaters already lapping at the base of their chosen route. Cassandra climbed with methodical precision, identifying handholds and testing each placement before committing her weight. The others followed her exact path, Sullivan bringing up the rear to assist anyone who faltered. Halfway up the initial climb, disaster nearly struck. Noah slipped on water-slicked stone, losing his grip and sliding several feet before Maya, secured above him, managed to brace herself and catch his outstretched hand. The near fall left them both shaken, but determined to continue. "Place your hands exactly where I did," Cassandra called down to them. "There's a pattern in the rock erosion. The southeastern faces have more secure texture due to prevailing wind patterns. Trust the canyon to show you its safe paths." The insight helped them adjust their technique, finding purchase where it seemed impossible. 20 grueling minutes later, they reached the relative safety of Dragon's Backbone, a serrated ridge that ran like a spine between the main canyon and its tributary. From this elevation, the true scale of the flood became apparent. The entire lower canyon system was now submerged, water still rising as distant rainfall continued to feed the torrent. "My God," Sullivan breathed, watching as equipment from Axiom's mining operation was swept away by the furious current. "If we'd been caught down there—" "Look," Maya pointed toward the northwest ledge where they had last seen Axiom and his security team. The figures were no longer visible, but a helicopter appeared through the rain clouds, hovering precariously near the canyon wall. As they watched, it attempted to approach the ledge, but was forced back by powerful wind gusts. "He's trying to evacuate by air," Noah observed. "In this weather, that's nearly as dangerous as staying put." Cassandra was already moving along the ridge, her focus entirely on navigating the treacherous path before them. "We need to keep moving. This ridge channels lightning during electrical storms, and the air pressure suggests we're not done with this system yet." The traverse along Dragon's Backbone tested every ounce of their remaining strength and courage. The path, little more than a series of connected ledges, never widened beyond 3 feet and in some sections narrowed to mere inches. On either side, sheer drops of hundreds of feet ended in raging floodwaters, while above, the storm continued. Its relentless assault, wind threatening to tear them from their precarious perch with each powerful gust. Cassandra navigated with uncanny precision, her feet finding secure placement where none seemed to exist. More than simple memory guided her now. She read the stone itself, interpreting subtle colorations that indicated stability, recognizing patterns in erosion that revealed the canyon's hidden history of water and wind. When they reached a section where the ridge appeared completely severed by a 6-foot gap, she paused only briefly before identifying a slightly lower traverse option that bypassed the obstacle entirely. "How could you possibly know that was there?" Trevor asked as they safely negotiated the detour. The geologist's earlier skepticism had been replaced by undisguised admiration. "James and I mapped 15 different routes across this ridge system. Over the years," Cassandra explained, her voice steady despite their perilous position. "The gap formed during the earthquake 3 summers ago, but the lower bypass has held stable because it's reinforced by a seam of harder basalt that resists erosion." Her detailed knowledge of the canyon's constant evolution, not just its permanent features, but how it changed with each natural event, was the difference between life and death on this journey. No GPS, no satellite imagery, no modern technology could provide what Cassandra carried in her mind, a living map that adapted to the canyon's own rhythms. After nearly an hour on the ridge, they reached a descending path that would take them to the relative safety of Whispering Rock. The massive formation had become an island in the flood, its bulk diverting the raging waters around its base while providing shelter on its elevated sections. As they made their final approach, the storm's full electrical fury was unleashed. Lightning split the sky in jagged forks, striking the higher ridges with explosive force. One bolt hit Dragon's backbone barely 50 yards behind them, the concussive shock nearly knocking them from their feet. "Run!" Sullivan shouted unnecessarily. They were already sprinting for the shelter of Whispering Rock's overhanging sections. They reached safety moments before hail began to fall, ice pellets the size of marbles striking the exposed stone with bruising force. Huddled beneath the overhang, the group collapsed in exhaustion, their bodies trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and effort. "We made it," Maya whispered, disbelief evident in her voice. "I didn't think we would. But we made it." Cassandra moved to the edge of their shelter, watching the storm's continued assault on the canyon. From their position, they could see a segment of the opposite wall where Axiom's evacuation attempt was still underway. The helicopter had managed to extract 2 people from the ledge before being forced to retreat, leaving others stranded as water began to breach their position. "He's not going to make it, is he?" Sullivan joined her, his expression complex, a mixture of justice-satisfied and reluctant empathy for fellow humans in peril. "Not if he waits for the helicopter to return," Cassandra confirmed. "That storm cell is intensifying. No aircraft will be able to approach for hours." As if to punctuate her assessment, another lightning strike illuminated the canyon, revealing figures on the ledge frantically signaling the departing helicopter. Among them, Cassandra recognized Victor Axiom's distinctive silhouette. The man's commanding presence diminished by the vastness of the natural forces surrounding him. "He's trapped by his own choices," she observed quietly. "He built an escape route that relied on technology rather than understanding the canyon itself." "Should we?" Sullivan began, then hesitated, the question of rescue hanging unspoken between them. Cassandra considered for a long moment. The man stranded across the canyon had likely ordered her husband's death, had certainly attempted to destroy her livelihood, and had threatened to kill them all mere hours ago. Justice would be served if nature claimed him now. Yet something in her recoiled at the thought. James had devoted his life to keeping people safe in this wilderness, believing that the canyon's power demanded respect, not victims. "There's a traverse route from their position that could reach higher ground," she finally said, "if they had someone who knew how to find it." Sullivan studied her face in the storm-filtered light. "You're considering guiding them out?" "After everything he's done, I'm considering giving them the knowledge to save themselves." She reached for her pack, retrieving a set of emergency signal mirrors, simple technology that could function even in these conditions. Whether they use it is up to them. Using the mirrors to catch brief flashes of lightning, Cassandra sent a simple signal across the canyon. 3 deliberate flashes followed by directional indicators that any experienced outdoorsman would recognize as emergency communication. After several attempts, a responding flash confirmed her signal had been received. With methodical precision, she transmitted essential information, directions to a hidden traverse 30 feet above their current position, warnings about unstable sections, guidance on timing their ascent between wind gusts. There was no guarantee they would trust or follow her directions, but she had offered what James would have wanted her to provide. "That's more mercy than he deserves," Sullivan commented as she finished the transmission. "It's not about mercy," Cassandra replied, watching as movement on the distant ledge suggested at least some of her instructions were being followed. "It's about who I choose to be in this canyon. James always said the landscape reveals our true character." The storm's intensity finally began to diminish as evening approached, though the floodwaters continued to surge through the canyon below. Their shelter on Whispering Rock would remain safe through the night, providing time for the worst of the deluge to recede before they attempted to find a path back to civilization. As darkness fell, Sullivan gathered the team to take stock of their situation and achievements. Despite the harrowing escape, they had secured what they came for: documented evidence of his grandfather's claim, geological samples proving the deposit's value, and perhaps most significantly, recorded confessions from Axiom about the operation's true nature. Once we're back in range, Iris can transmit the recordings to our legal team, he explained, the excitement of victory tempering the exhaustion evident in his features. With Axiom's own words confirming the illegal nature of the operation, we'll have leverage to force the recognition of my grandfather's original claim through appropriate government channels. What about the Canyon Safety Initiative? Trevor asked, glancing toward Cassandra, who sat slightly apart from the group, monitoring the gradually receding flood. That's non-negotiable, Sullivan confirmed. Full funding, with or without Axiom's cooperation. James Blackwood will get the recognition and justice he deserves. As the others discussed legal strategies and next steps, Maya approached Cassandra, settling beside her at the edge of their shelter. I've studied geology my entire adult life, the scientist began, her voice reflective. I thought I understood stone, earth, the physical processes that shape landscapes. But watching you navigate today... She paused, searching for adequate words. You read this canyon like it's a living text, not just remembering static features, but understanding how they change, how they speak to each other across time. Cassandra smiled faintly. James used to say, scientists study the canyon, but guides have to listen to it. There's knowledge in observation and measurement, but there's wisdom in relationship. Your memory saved our lives today, Maya continued. But it wasn't just recall. It was interpretation, connection, synthesis. You didn't just remember the way, you created it as conditions changed. The insight struck closer to Cassandra's own understanding than most people ever reached. Her gift wasn't photographic memory in the clinical sense. It was a profound, cognitive relationship with landscape, a dialogue between her mind and the living stone that surrounded her. When James died, she said softly, people assumed I would leave the canyon, start fresh somewhere less painful, less dangerous. They didn't understand that these stones hold more than my memories. They hold my conversation with the world. Leaving would have silenced the only voice that still made sense to me. Dawn broke over the canyon rim, revealing a transformed landscape. The floodwaters had begun their retreat, leaving behind scoured stone and rearranged terrain, familiar yet altered, like a face changed by experience. From their elevated position, they could see that parts of Sentinel Spire had collapsed, likely burying sections of Axiom's illegal mining operation under tons of debris. No sign remained of Axiom or his security team on the opposite ledge. Whether they had successfully followed Cassandra's guidance to higher ground or been claimed by the storm remained unknown. Helicopter search patterns in the distance suggested rescue operations were underway throughout the canyon system as they prepared for their journey back to civilization. Sullivan approached Cassandra with formal paperwork, a contract outlining her share in whatever proceeded from their discovery and official documentation for the James Blackwood Canyon Safety Initiative. Regardless of what happens with Axiom, or the government classification of the deposit, this ensures your future is secure, he explained, his respect evident in both gesture and tone. Though I suspect Blackwood outfitters won't lack for clients once word of this expedition spreads. Cassandra accepted the documents with a nod of appreciation. The validation of her skills and the justice for James mattered far more than financial security, though the latter would certainly help rebuild what Dominic Reeves and Victor Axiom had tried to destroy. Their descent from Whispering Rock required all of Cassandra's expertise, navigating a landscape fundamentally altered by the flood. Features she had known for decades had disappeared, while new landmarks presented themselves in the scoured terrain. Yet even here, her unique relationship with the canyon guided them, her mind automatically updating its internal map with each new discovery. 3 days later, exhausted but triumphant, they emerged from the canyon system near an access road where Eli Youngblood waited with transportation. The old guide's weathered face creased with relief at their appearance. "The storm triggered search and rescue operations throughout the territory," he explained as they loaded into his vehicles. "Dominic Reeves was found clinging to debris 3 miles downstream, babbling about secret mines and government conspiracies. Most people think he suffered head trauma during the flood." "An axiom?" Sullivan asked, exchanging meaningful glances with Cassandra. "No sign yet," Eli replied, though a helicopter reported possible survivors on the northern plateau. Teams are investigating. As they drove away from the canyon that had nearly claimed them, Cassandra gazed back at the ancient stone formations silhouetted against the evening sky. The landscape had been transformed by the flood, just as she had been transformed by her journey through it, not erased or diminished, but revealed in its essential nature, stripped of pretense and illusion. 3 months later, Cassandra stood on the newly constructed observation deck at Remington Pass, watching as officials unveiled the cornerstone for the James Blackwood Canyon Safety Center. The facility would serve as both memorial and practical resource, providing education, emergency response, and advanced mapping services for the entire canyon system. Sullivan's legal team had successfully leveraged the evidence they gathered to force recognition of his grandfather's original claim. The rare earth deposit was now being developed as a joint venture between Sullivan Mining and carefully vetted government partners, with proper environmental oversight and legal transparency. Victor Axiom had survived the flood, though his empire had not. Federal investigations sparked by their discoveries had unraveled a network of illegal operations and corrupt officials that had controlled much of the region's resource development for decades. Dominic Reeves faced multiple criminal charges, while Axiom himself had negotiated a complex immunity deal in exchange for intelligence on other operations. As the ceremony concluded, Cassandra stepped away from the crowds, finding a quiet vantage point overlooking the canyon that had shaped her life. The late afternoon sun painted the stone in shades of amber and crimson, highlighting the eternal and the ephemeral in equal measure, unchanged formations that had witnessed millennia alongside fresh scars from the recent flood. She reached into her pocket, fingers closing around the small piece of James's compass that she still carried everywhere. The weight of grief had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something she could carry differently now. A memory, as much a part of her internal landscape as the canyon itself. A voice spoke from behind her. "Mrs. Blackwood, they're ready to begin the mapping project whenever you are." She turned to find Maya waiting respectfully at a distance. The geologist had accepted a position as research director for the new safety center, overseeing the creation of the most comprehensive canyon survey ever attempted. "The equipment's all been calibrated," Maya continued. "Though everyone understands the technology is just backup, your memory is still our primary mapping system." Cassandra nodded, tucking away the compass piece and straightening her shoulders. The project ahead would document every passage, every seasonal water source, every stable traversal route through the canyon system, creating a resource that could save countless lives in the future. The canyon had taken much from her. The man she loved, years of work, almost her livelihood. But it had also given her a purpose, a unique relationship with landscape that transcended ordinary understanding. Her memory of these stone corridors hadn't just saved her life and the lives of Sullivan's team. It had become her path to justice and healing. As she followed Maya back to the center, Cassandra's mind was already mapping the work ahead, not just remembering the canyon's paths, but creating new ones that would connect her past to a future she could now fully embrace. The terrain ahead was altered but navigable, challenging but comprehensible to someone who had learned to read every subtle message written in stone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.